Hey everybody, it's me again. Welcome to week number 2, and way to go on completing their first meeting this past week. I trust everything went well. I know that probably some of you have some questions or maybe have some feedback, and we want to encourage you to make sure you email us or contact us. Contact me. I would love to hear personally about what's going on in your life groups all throughout. But congratulations on getting past week 1. In preparation for this coming week, I wanted to talk a little bit about the content and the lesson for this coming week. The title is What Hearing God Is Not, and the main idea is that hearing God, some of the difficulties we have with that really stem from a wrong view of God. And most of our troubles in life do. But in particular, when we're trying to approach God in terms of hearing Him, last week we talked about how important it is to put this whole idea of hearing God in a larger context, and that is friendship with God. This week, that theme sort of continues, but we're going to talk a little more specifically about some of the ways in which we view hearing God that are actually obstacles. And so, the primary obstacle, and this is probably one of the key insights, is when it comes to hearing God, the number one reason why we fail to hear Him is because we have this deep desire to be in control of this whole process. And when we're the ones in control, it's dangerous because we often can make God say what we want Him to hear, right? Or, and we may be doing that not really not really in a conscious way, out of maybe a sincere desire to know what God wants to say to us, but there's a part of us that still wants to be in control, and so. We even use the Bible in this process. We mishandle the Scripture. We make it say what we want it to say, take it out of context. And I think maybe the key here is that when we're approaching this issue of personal guidance or receiving from God or hearing from God in these ways, that we have to come to Him willing and ready to obey and cooperate with Him. And to let Him have the freedom to say what He wants to say instead of us asking Him to bless what we want to do. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Because often I think that's what we do. We decided in advance what we want to do, and we just want God to bless it. So to avoid that, we've got to come to a place of real surrender. And when we say, God, I want you to speak to me in this area of my life, that we come with a surrender to whatever God is going to say, a willingness to obey. When we come with a willingness to obey, then the likelihood that we'll hear God accurately increases. And if you're not willing to obey, I think you can even have that kind of conversation with God. God, I'm not yet willing to obey. I'm struggling with this, and the Lord will work in your life to help you get to that place of a willingness to surrender and to lay down what He's asking you to lay down or what you need to lay down. So that's one of the first insights this week, is that it's our desire to be in control that often gets in the way of our ability to hear God clearly. Of course, there are issues when it comes to motivation, like in the book of James where it says you have not because you ask not, and if you ask with wrong motives. And so there's always got to be that place of heart searching when it comes to hearing God's voice. Are my motives pure? Am I just using God? Or do I really want to do His will? The other important insight I think to camp on, or that will feel like a new insight to some people, is this idea that responsibility and initiative are at the heart of our relationship to God. That God is wanting to relate to us ultimately as mature friends of His. And that requires responsibility and initiative on our part. The insight, or I should say the passage that is used here in the message, is the parable of the talents in Matthew 20, I think it's 25. And the big I guess, takeaway here is that when the master gives these talents to these men, he doesn't really tell them what to do with it. Maybe he assumes they're just going to invest it, but the idea is that he doesn't give them specific directions. He trusts them with these talents. And it says that he gives them according to their ability. And they take the talents and they make the choice, they take the responsibility, and they take the initiative to invest it. The one person who doesn't invest it, the guy who's given one talent, he's the one who's called a wicked and a lazy servant, because he doesn't take responsibility or initiative with what he's been given. So this idea of hearing God and is connected in that sometimes God will come to us after we've surrendered our will to him and are willing to obey whatever he says. There are times when what he says to us will require, in fact often it requires, our responsibility and initiative. And we're not to expect God to dictate every single detail of that responsibility and initiative. That we are to make wise choices. And if our hearts are surrendered, if our motives are right, then when we choose, often out of our own initiative and responsibility, and God, what we're choosing is not something that's in God's design for us, then we can trust that the Lord will let us know. And it'll be very clear that we're about to choose the wrong way. So that idea, I think, is going to be important to discuss, or at least to go over. How does responsibility and initiative play a role in hearing God? Because often we want to just hear God, and we're doing it because we want all the responsibility to be on him, and we don't want to take any responsibility. And it's easy for us to say, God told me, therefore, if this doesn't turn out right, it must be God's fault. That's not how it works. Growing in a friendship with God where we're hearing him more and more clearly and accurately requires that we partner in this initiative, in this responsibility of understanding his will, learning to hear his voice and discern his voice, and then where it's not clear, having the freedom to just act out of the wisdom what we do have, to walk in the light that we have been given, you see. And I think that pleases God. And where we're about to step into some danger, or wherever we're about to do something that may not be the right choice, we can trust that the Lord will guide us and keep us from those choices, you see. So it begins with a desire to control. It requires responsibility and initiative. And the other last insight I wanted to kind of just bring out as you prepare for your meeting is to remember that our growth in hearing God, it requires two things. It requires discerning the words of God. So the Bible is important. Hearing God's voice through the Scriptures. Hearing God's voice through other means, like other people in your life. Sometimes people will speak prophetic words over you, and you want to be discerning and hearing the voice of God. So growing in that skill to discern the voice of God through his word. The other aspect of that is one we don't often talk about, and that is discerning God's voice by being immersed in his work. Okay, so it's twofold. There's being immersed in his word and being immersed in his work. So if you're not engaged in the work of God, then it's going to be difficult for you to understand God's will. Many people just want to know what God's will is so they can go off and live their own life. No. If you're immersed in God's work, in what God is doing in and around you, whether that means serving in church, in a ministry that fulfills you, or serving in the community in some way that expresses God's redemptive heart towards the world, and helps people, come to know Christ, or at least take one step closer to Christ. All of that is part of God's work in the world. If we're engaged in that at different levels in our lives, then we will be growing in our understanding of what God intends and what his thoughts are. So we don't always have to ask God, do you want this, do you want that? Because we'll know through our engagement in His work. And I find that that's been true in my life. There are questions that I've had that sometimes the Bible isn't clear on. As I've been engaged in His work, as I've been working with people, helping them take one more step closer to Christ, I find that the Lord, through those experiences, is able to take what I understand of Scripture, what I understand of His Word, and what I'm experiencing in the moment, and He's able to bring integration and better, clearer understanding for me about what He would like to see in those situations. So that when I encounter those things again, I don't need to ask God, what's your will? Should I say this? Should I do that? I just do. I just act. And if it's the right thing, then great. If it turns out to be immensely fruitful, then wonderful. But I'm acting out of a sense of experience and faith and understanding that has grown over time as I've been engaged in the work of God. So those two things: immerse yourself in the Word, reading it, meditating on it, studying it. Immerse yourself in God's work. Those are two general ways in which we can prepare ourselves to better hear God's voice over time. Okay? Hope those insights help this week. I know you'll be studying, I think it's Stepford Wives, where the idea is God doesn't make us into robots. He wants us to be fully engaged, fully responsible, fully initiating agents in this friendship as well. Okay, so it's a partnership. And it's a friendship partnership. We're co-laborers with God in His kingdom work here on earth. So God bless you. Enjoy this week number 2. And send in your questions. Email them as they come. And we hope that it is an immensely enriching and fruitful meeting this week for you. God bless.